well-being, making it real in secondary schools. My name is Asel, and I'm going to be moderating this session today. We are going to hear a presentation from Dr. Mary Jean Gallagher, an educator and leader with a passion for educational improvement and with a focus on excellence and equity. Ms. Gallagher is the founder and CEO of the company named MJ Gallagher and Associates. She is currently an education advisor for the Department of Education for State of Victoria in Australia. Prior to this, she has been providing presentations, advice, and mentoring for educational leaders of all levels from more than 26 countries on 6 continents. And Dr. Gallagher has authored a number of publications on system reform in education. And the topic she's going to touch upon today is very timely because the pandemic made us realize once again that the school is not only about learning, providing students well-being, as well as developing their soft skills is also crucial. We are extremely glad to have a speaker with so much expertise and experience in the field, and we are looking forward to a lot of insights and ideas to further enhance our school cultures and drive the development. Before we get started, I have a couple of housekeeping notes. Today's session is being recorded to be available for post-conference viewing. And in case you have questions to a speaker, you can use questions feature of NIS conference mobile application. In case we have time at the end of the conference, at the workshop, or some of them might be answered. Yeah, and the speaker today will have a total of 40 minutes for the workshop, and we plan to finish the session by 1 p.m. Nur-Sultan time. Now, moving along to our session, please welcome Dr. Mary Jean Gallagher.
Welcome, and it's good to have this many people across your country and others wanting to, first of all, serve your students more successfully, but secondly, to sharpen your implementation skills. You know, when I look at conferences, and I speak at a number of them, one of the biggest challenges with attending conferences is that you see good ideas and you get excited about them and you want to use them in your school and in your teaching. But then you return to school and life gets busy again. And then a few days have passed, and then a week, and then a month. And then most of the new exciting learning gets left behind. So part of what I want to talk about in this workshop is not only what our students need for us to be able to lift them up and help them be more successful, but also to focus on things that you can do and ways that you can approach working with colleagues in your school or schools nearby to actually have that that learning that you've got turn into something that you're actually going to decide to do and do together with your students. And so today's workshop, we're going to delve more deeply into what you can do to have a more sustainable impact on student learning and wanting to move forward there and make whatever we're talking about and wanting to do real in our secondary schools. So I want to begin by centering your thinking a bit on with respect to how you might identify some new directions and new goals for your students in your schools. And we started this process, or I'm going to refer back to this process rather in my panel presentation later in the conference. You know, in order to raise success for our students, schools must examine their program through three lenses. How to build excellence, first of all. Because when you think about what a student is going through when they feel really good about themselves and when their well-being is in the right direction and they're being successful as we go forward, we know that they can't achieve excellence without feeling good about themselves. But if they're failing in the academics at school and they don't have the reading skills and the background skills to be successful, it's pretty difficult for them to feel confident in themselves and centered and well, as it were. So schools need to look at how they're going to serve their students in their community through the lens of creating excellence and achievement for our students, and also for working to ensure that students and teachers are experiencing a sense of well-being. that they have a sense of belonging in the school, that they have a sense of, they're building a sense of who they are, and they're building confidence in what they're learning and in their skills. And the third lens that I would urge every school to bring to the work they do is an equity lens. Students become anxious when the students around them are not successful, or if the teacher is starting to give some of those students a hard time. So part of what we need to create in our schools as we go forward is a combination of all of these things as we go forward. But we also need to think then about what success really means for our students. What is it that we need for our students as they finish high school and they're ready to go on with the rest of their career? We don't want to leave people behind as we go. Anyway, so what does success mean? Well, a number of schools around the world are actually taking that question quite seriously. And they're saying to themselves, or sitting down together with parents and students and people in the school and saying, well, what is the profile of our graduate? What is it that we want our graduates to be able to know and understand and do? And that becomes the starting point for a school's change process. And so a group of schools in my province in Ontario actually did this together. It became a province-wide thing. And we decided that what we wanted for our students was that they would be personally successful people. We want our students to be good human beings, someone that you would love to live next door to, people who are engaged with others in their communities, who live a productive life, etc. We wanted to make sure as well that our students were economically productive, that in order to have a successful life, they need to be able to make a living. They need to be able to provide for their families and be able to put food on the table and shelter and so on as they go forward from there. And the final thing that we identified was that we wanted them to become actively engaged in their communities, that they would pay attention to what was going on around them, and they would understand that they could contribute to the well-being of their community as they go forward. And so that's where we looked at what we wanted to build in our secondary schools. I would really encourage you in your schools to make sure that you have that vision of a graduate and what they look like as you go forward. We need to talk in our schools as well about what staff and students need. What is it that we need to be able to deliver for our students and to lift them up and help them be more successful? And the first and most important thing we can give them is high expectations. It's been my experience all around the world that students will live up or down to what a teacher and a school expects them to be capable of doing. So if we look at our students and we think that they're not very capable, we tend to water down our teaching. And what we need to do is to maintain really high standards in our teaching, but build ramps and supports to help our students get there. In order to do that as well, we need to make sure that we give our students strong foundations. So much of what our students need to be able to do to be successful in life is be able to read well, think critically, be able to solve problems using mathematical tools, being able to understand enough science that they can understand the world around them, those kinds of things. And so the foundations of our subject area are important. And I need to say that it's not just the expectation or role of an elementary school to ensure that students can read and write well. There's a role for secondary schools too, and I want to come back to that later. Finally, we need to leverage up what we refer to worldwide as deep learning. It's a set of skills that actually take our students further. When we look at that, we know, for instance, there's a whole set of things that we need to be able to include in that. This is one model. It's not the only out there. They're sometimes called 21st century skills. But we want to nurture our students' creativity. We want to help them communicate well, both orally, in writing, and digitally, so that they understand the use of technology and be able to use it, although, frankly, many of them are far better than we are as adults. The citizenship, critical thinking, that they're able to take in information and put it into the context of the other things that they're learning, etc. We want to do things that help build their sense of themselves and their sense that they can be in control of their own learning as they go forward. Finally, it's been really clear that they need collaboration as a skill, that they need to be able to work in teams, because that's how things happen in our world these days. So one of the questions I often get when we talk about doing all of this, and I would encourage your staff to do some research on their own about what they want this combination of things to look like in their schools. But the one question that often comes up is, well, yes, but I'm a science teacher or a geography teacher or a math teacher. How can I cover my own curriculum expectations in my subject area, the things that I know students need to know in my subject area, and then add all of those other requirements of creativity and critical thinking and collaboration, all of that as well? And my answer to that is this, that there's a really solid piece of good news around how you do that. The research is really clear that if we approach teaching our subject area in a more integrated way, we can actually include work on foundational skills, on helping our students use the language of our topic, of our subject areas, well as we go forward. That in those areas, we can teach that broader curriculum. We can engage students in projects, in collaborative inquiry, in knowledge building on their own. Those kinds of experiences help the students actually learn our science curriculum, our math curriculum that much better. But it also gives them that sense of they're in control of some of their learning. And that's important, because we understand that actually the best thing we can do for our students is to teach them the skills of greater metacognition, that we want them to be able to manage their own learning path throughout their lifetime, because so much changes around us as we go. Now, I also want to identify 5 areas in which we can consciously work to improve our schools. And if we think about what our students need in our secondary schools, I would encourage you to think about them in these contexts. And these actually were the 5 areas that we used in Ontario to significantly improve our graduation rates. They're also being used now by just about any of the jurisdictions I work with around the world. And the first is to think about your school culture and pathways. As we're trying to lift our students up, we are no longer just teaching our subject areas, but if we're a math teacher, as I was in a high school when I started my career, it's really important that we connect with our students, that we build relationships, and that we make sure that our school itself has a culture that supports them if we want them to be well. So when we talk about the school culture and pathways, what I'm talking about there is the students' ability, first of all, to feel they belong in the school, to make connections and to feel as if someone there cares about them. Secondly, it's this notion that every student coming to the school should have a pathway of courses and programs which will take them to a successful destination after secondary school. And that might be an apprenticeship into the trades. It might be attending a college for further study in certain areas. It could be that they're heading to university, or it could be that they're going into the world of work. And those are all successful outcomes in our communities. But sometimes our high schools don't do a very good job of making sure that students feel successful, no matter which of those pathways they might be on. And as we move through other areas that we need to think about, we need to work really hard to make our programs engaging and relevant to our students. Because anymore, if they get too bored and wander off, we've lost them. The other area we need to think about is the efficacy, the effectiveness of our instruction. As teachers, we need to be ready to step into new ways of teaching at least some of our time so that our students can be more successful and more engaged in their learning. And finally, we need to have within our school some programs of intervention so that we can identify right away and say 4 weeks, if it were 5 weeks into a student's presence in the school, if they're starting to fall behind. And we have a process, first of all, for finding them, recognizing that they're in trouble in some subject areas, and a program and process that's going to help lift them up and keep them moving forward. Because otherwise, by the time we start to talk about helping them, it's been so long that they're way behind their program. They aren't feeling good about themselves, and they don't have a chance to be successful. And that's a lot for the school to ask. So we need to find ways to engage our parents and the community in helping us do that. Now, that's kind of a quick review of the landscape around us as we go. And so what I would like to look at right now is to ask you this question. And from time to time, we're going to stop for just a minute to give those of you taking part in this workshop, in this session, a chance to think and reflect about what we've been talking about. So my first question to you would be this: what would those kinds of programs and some of those areas look like in a school? And in particular, what might it look like in your school as we go forward? And I'm going to take just 1 minute right now where I'm going to be silent, and I'm going to ask you, if you're with another colleague watching this, please talk about this with your colleague. If you're on your own, perhaps you can think about it and just jot down some notes. 1 minute. Moving on then and coming back together. When I was working with your conference organizers, I did send them a placemat, which is a document that you might be able to use to collect some of your answers and questions. But we were unable to send it out to you. It is available though from them. So I'm going to take those questions and put them into a planning framework for you, so that we'll talk about those questions along the way. And hopefully, as you've answered them and thought of them, it's going to give you a head start on working with your colleagues on how to make changes in some of the areas around this conference that have excited you so far. Anyway, we're going to take some additional time right now to consider some additional questions. And the questions are as follows. When you think about all you've learned at this conference, what is it that you want to change or improve in your school? And secondly, what's the problem you're trying to solve? Usually if we want to change something, we're trying to respond to something that's happening in our school. It may simply be having our kids come back together again and build some social skills that they've been missing, so that there's a greater sense of belonging in the school after the pandemic. What do we know about that problem? What do we know about the ways in which research tells us we might solve it? How are other schools solving it, et cetera? How do we know what we know? And this is really important, because we need to be able to make decisions on more than just, I think I know what the answer is. We want to be able to have conversations that are based on evidence within our school. So I'm going to put those questions back up, and we're going to take a little less than a minute. You won't be able to answer all of them, but pick one or two and give it a little more deeper thought. And so Now, as we come back together, and you've done that little bit of thinking already, and as we go forward towards our journey, towards well-being and excellence, there are a number of things about how we need to go about improving our schools that we need to have as tools ourselves going forward. And so I'm going to very quickly skim through some of the building blocks about what we know that you have to do and think about in order to build improvement and success into your efforts to change. And the first of these talks about how you improve school systems. There was a report put out several years ago by the McKinsey Corporation, and they said the following, that when you're trying to make changes in schools, you can prescribe in a top-down way minimum standard adequacy. But if you want to lift schools up, if you want them to go higher, if you want teachers engaged in the passionate pursuit of improved teaching, you can't do that by dictating it from the top. You actually have to create the conditions in your school that will allow that to happen. And that's a fascinating piece because it starts to put teachers and principals and teams of people working in school in the driver's seat when we talk about change. I also have a quote here from John Hattie. In his research, he says that the greatest influence on student success is having highly expert, inspired, and passionate teachers and school leaders. So teams of people who are deeply caring about wanting to make something better for their students, working together to maximize the effect of their teaching on all students in their care. So what we're looking at here is how do we work together to see when we teach something what the impact is on our students, and then to be able to move forward with new plans based on that. Now, one of the big issues that I've noticed people really make mistakes around is they tend to think that improving or changing something in a school is about accomplishing a set of tasks, getting this timeline down and getting this new schedule set up, buying new resources and textbooks, etc. But the truth is you can do all of those things and nothing changes in what goes on between teachers and students. Because you have to realize that when you're trying to improve or change something for the better in a school, it's really about changing the culture, and it's really about bringing the staff of the school and the community, for that matter, on board with you. So when we look at that, we have to plan to not only change the tasks, but we have to plan with how we're going to change people and their role in all of that as we go forward. Cotter had an 8-step change model that said, if you're going to try to change something, here's the way you try to make it happen. You create a sense of urgency. Well, we've got that now. The pandemic has given that to us. We know we've got our students coming back, and there's a whole broader range of what they have been able to keep up with while they were learning from home or learning online. We also know that there's a whole set of social needs that they have that are more urgent than before. Form a powerful coalition. Find the people in your school that are the opinion setters and get them engaged in working on the change with you. Create a vision for that change. Have them see what the impact of that change is going to be. Communicate, communicate, communicate. And when you think you've talked about it to the point where no one wants to hear it anymore, communicate about it some more. You cannot possibly talk about this too much as you go forward. It's really important that you do that because people need to know that it's alive and well in the school. And invite some of those people in your coalition to get there with you and to help you communicate about it. Next is remove obstacles. If people don't understand how to use project-based learning, if they don't understand how to successfully build teams of students working together, then let's make sure that we give them that training and development that they need. And that should be part of your plan as you orchestrate the change. Create and recognize some short-term wins. If in your school you want to see more teachers using project-based learning some of the time, then identify 1 or 2 people who are going to try it ahead of the others. And when they do something successful, talk about it. Have them tell people about it. Tell them what worked. Tell them what didn't work as well, or what they're struggling with, because change is a continuum. build on that change so that once we've got a few teachers who start to feel more confident, they can help their colleagues, etc. And then if part of this is about wanting to make it a permanent part of your school, you have to find ways to build the support structure for it and make that a permanent part of your school. So for example, if you've been creating extra time for teachers to meet so that they can plan these changes in their classrooms together, then you have to find a way to build that into the schedule of the school and to continue to provide resources and support to it as you go forward. We also know that we have to, as leaders, be thinking about bringing people on board with us. And so first we start with a task or an idea. We develop a bit of a process or a plan for how we're going to get people on board and move forward. We build the team around it and around the work and make sure that the team is regularly meeting and is making progress with it. You then engage the full team in the task and you connect with people outside of that team. So you're bringing more people on board in an invitational way all the time you're doing this. And finally, you end up and you're striving for broad ownership in the school of the change that you want to see happen. The last thing I want to talk about in terms of that is a diagram that provides you with a bit of a framework for thinking about how to move through making a change across your school. Because if it's just one teacher making a change or two, that's good for their students. But we want all the students in the school to be able to benefit from this. So we need to create that team approach as we go forward. And in this case, there is actually a little bit of a process you can design where you start by looking at the evidence in your school around that thing you want to change and analyzing the problem, as we talked about. We also then set our priorities for change from that. We look for some strategies that might work. We develop them ourselves, or we look in the research as to what kinds of strategies might lead to what we want. The action stage is really important. It's not enough that all the teachers know about these strategies. They have to make a commitment to trying them in their classroom and working together to do that and visiting each other's classrooms so that they can hold each other accountable for actually trying to make the changes happen. It takes practice to get better at some of these teaching strategies, and they don't feel comfortable when we first start. So then we look and we say, well, we were doing this because we wanted our students to be able to do this certain thing better. Did that work? Is there actually an impact there for them as you go along? And when you've done that cycle, then you go back and you repeat it and you say, well, what is it that we need to fine tune? So this kind of implementing change in teaching strategies and approaches or programs in the school is an iterative process. We try it, we fix it, we try it again. We try it, we fix it, we review, we keep what's working, we fine tune what isn't, and we do it all again as we go forward. This wheel actually will provide you with sort of another way of looking at leading that change in your school, that we jointly get together and determine what it is we're going to change. We build a common understanding across the school about it. We build teams of people to work on it, these collaborative cultures. We build teachers' capacity. What is it that teachers need to learn in order to be able to do this successfully? It's one thing to say, oh, we're all going to do project-based learning. But boy, there's a lot to be learned as a teacher if you're going to do that successfully. And it's easier if you do it together. We move from there to say, well, some teachers are going to be right out front with it early. They can help. But there are going to be other teachers who are going to need, just like our students, a little more extra help in order to be able to move there. Communicate, communicate, communicate. Make sure you've got your school influencers on board. And then engage in, gee, I wonder if this would work better if we tried this inquiry kind of learning as we go forward. Michael Fullen and Joanne Quinn, a couple of colleagues of mine, wrote a book a few years ago called the Coherence Framework. And it actually does provide a reminder to us of what we need to do to implement change. And I'm going to go through this as quickly as I can, because I think I'm a little behind right now, because I want to get to some examples that I've seen in schools where schools have tried some things that have been successful in helping students in well-being and in their academic pursuits, as well as building equity within the school. The Coherence Framework says essentially there are 4 kinds of things you need to do in order to successfully implement changes. One is to come up with a direction that you can have in common and build a common language around it. They talk about that from the point of view of setting the stage for a long-term change in the school in capacity and achievement by picking a few goals. We can't change 75 things. We can change 2 or 3 things at a time. And when we do that, we can actually bring the rest of the pieces of the school together around that to create some coherence. The next thing I want to point out is that on that planning framework we talked about, that's really all part of the analysis and priority setting as a project that we work on. And so we come back to that again and again because it defines the stages that we're in. We need to pay attention, in addition to setting direction and deciding what we're going to do, to bringing people on board with it, helping everyone in the school develop a culture of trust, a focus on learning, an understanding that we're all going to have to learn some new skills and a plan for how to do it, and the ability to work in teams. Turns out that the ability to work in teams is one of the biggest pieces that actually makes the difference between somebody who says they're going to do something and someone who actually does make it part of the landscape in their school. And so what we're trying to do there is to create collaborative cultures as we go along, implementing structures and processes that bring the principals, school leadership teams together collaboratively, leading that continuous improvement and building an attitude throughout the school that says we're all learning here and we're all getting better. And that's how our students are going to be able to be better at what they're doing as well. Moving on from there, again, this is now actually moving into the strategies part of things where we're saying, okay, putting those teams together is one of our strategies. Having those teams work and talk about how they're going to implement those changes in their school, that's one of their strategies as we go forward as well. And so continuing with the questions here, and this one I'm not going to take time to stop on here, but one of the good questions that you might want to make sure that you spend some time thinking about it is, what can you do to better engage your staff and your parent community in supporting and leading the change that you want to have happen in your school together? You do need to spend some time in your change management thinking about that and planning for it as we go forward, because that's how you're going to make things happen as we go forward. So here's a set of questions that I do want to take some time to have you examine, and we're going to do another 1 minute think about this. When you think about what it is you're going to change in your school, whatever you've decided it might be, it's really important to build that vision of what it's going to do for you, what it's going to help you accomplish for your students, right? So the question that needs to be addressed at this point by your group of teachers working together is, if we were successful in implementing this change, what is it that would change for our students? What would be different in classrooms for our students if we were successful in this change? And secondly, what would that look like for teachers? What would be different about what teachers do and how they approach their professional task if we were successfully implementing this? So we kind of say, well, let's pretend we've gotten to the end of this. What are we going to see that's different for students? What are we going to see that's different for teachers? What are we going to see that's different for the leaders in the school? If you take the time up front to describe those things, your people will have a much clearer understanding of what it is that you want them to do. And that's really important if you're trying to move the whole school forward. So we come back to those questions. And the fourth part of the quadrant of the Coherence Framework, and that's, or the third rather, deepening learning. So we look at that and we say, well, what does that mean? That's building all those extra things into our program, teaching kids critical and creative thinking, teaching them problem-solving skills, etc., having them reflect on those kinds of skills that they're learning as you go forward as well, taking time to build the tools of keeping themselves well and managing their life. All of those things fit into this, where we actually start to become really precise and clear about our learning goals moving forward. Improving student skill using evidence of the learning to continuously improve what we're doing there. Part of that then is making sure as we go forward that we implement a framework into our teaching that shifts classroom and school practices to focus on those additional skills. So yes, we want them to understand science in our science classes. We want them to understand math in our math classes. But we also want them to understand general problem solving. And we want them to understand critical thinking, that when they get an article or 3 articles about the same thing, that they can start to pick out where those articles are the same and add credibility, and where there are some questions that they should be asking about whether this article is actually giving them the truth or not. Those are really important skills that our people need to be able to develop as we go forward. And so we want them to be able to do that. And we want teachers and principals to be able to use evidence of what they're seeing students learn in order to inform their change practice. I once had a principal in a school, it was an elementary school, come to me all excited, telling me, we've done this great thing, the whole school is working together, and we're feeling so excited about what we've accomplished. And I said to him, oh, and what is it that you were focusing on? He said to me, spelling. And I, inside my head, I thought spelling's not exactly a huge goal, but okay, if you want to start there, build the ability of your staff to learn how to change their practice together and go on to some other things, that's fine. So I was being polite and I said, oh, spelling, how long have you been working on this as a whole school? And he said, 2 years. And I thought, oh no. So then I asked the critical question. What have you noticed in the difference in your students' ability to spell? Are you seeing a result from all of this work you've put into spelling? And he looked at me and he said, no, they're still spelling the same as they were 2 years ago. Nothing has changed. And I just lost it then. I just looked at him and I said, you know, if you find that the horse you've been riding is dead, it's time to get off. When we make a change in our schools and in our teaching practice, we need to watch for the impact on our students. And if whatever it is we're doing isn't having that change that we wanted for our students, then we need to solve one of 2 questions. Was it a bad idea and a bad program change in the first place? Or was it a good idea and we implemented it poorly? And what can we fine tune so that we can get the gains we wanted for our students out of that change? That's an absolutely critical piece. Part of that is, in fact, using assessment to drive our instruction. So we know the curriculum, we know what we want to teach, we know the subject area content and how much of it we want our students to be able to understand and use. Before we choose our pedagogical approach, we need to assess where our various students are, because we need to start where our students are in order to take them forward. So in this context, then when we've taught the lessons, at the end of it, we should be asking ourselves, did the students learn? Did they learn what we wanted them to learn? If they didn't, what are we going to do about it? If they did, what are we going to keep doing to move them further? I mean, this sounds pretty straightforward, but it's amazing that not a lot of us as teachers did that in our classrooms. I now want to change gears a bit with the time that I have left, which is not much, to talk about some examples of changes that schools made for their students. One is a transition year change, where in fact, we looked at it and said, one of the big risks for our students is that they get lost in their first year of high school. And as they get lost in their first year of high school, we lose them. It's really serious. The research actually says if a student is not successful in one course in their first year of high school, they are 30% more likely to drop out of school. And that's not good for them. It's not good for their families. It's not good for their community. So we wanted to keep them in school. So one of the ways some of the schools have been doing this is by identifying a teacher who's going to be a mentor teacher for 3 or 4 of the first year students coming in. Those students aren't in that teacher's class because this isn't about teaching them. This is about mentoring them and being happy to see them, giving them a sense that they're valued in the school. So what we would do is say the students would have, say, their lockers or something that they attend right outside the teacher's door. And the job of the mentor teacher was to be out in the hallway each day looking for their 3 or 4 students and being happy to see them, You know, John, are you okay today? You know, I didn't see you yesterday. I was worried about you. I thought you might be sick. Are you doing all right? Are things going okay here for you? You know, I miss you when you're not here. That will do more for attendance than any number of ways in which we tell students it's bad if they don't attend. So we need to find some ways in which we, in fact, can do that going forward. There are a number of other things we can do in terms of communication with home and timetabling moving forward. One of the other things I saw that was absolutely brilliant, I thought, was project-based learning in Denmark. In Denmark, in order to graduate from high school, year 10 or whatever, a student spends... Yes?
We have 5 minutes left.
Okay, give me 1 minute to talk about this project and then we'll wrap up. In Denmark, they have to do a major project in which they work in teams on a project. It's a project of their choosing that integrates several of their subject areas. And I watched as they started this with students in year 7 with a small project. And the teachers actually taught them the skills of working in a group, etc. So there are a number of ways that you can, in fact, bring this forward, and a number of things that you can do to make it work. And I know that we're starting to run out of some time here as we go forward. So I'm going to ask you in all of this then to, pardon me, I'm backing up a little bit here, to talk a little bit about what you can do to build a caring organization. In fact, you need to work together and focus on learning and well-being. Be curious and express your curiosity about how to make those changes happen. Use more diverse pedagogy. Students will appreciate it. And then find ways to normalize that. So I will come back to you now, open to any questions anyone might want to pose for me in all of this. And if there are some that come in afterwards, if you can email them to me, I would be happy to have you do that.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Gallagher. It was really informative and thought-provoking, I should say. So we reflected our own practice all the way along your presentation. So there are some couple of questions, if you don't mind. So one question which came was, how long does it generally take to establish this school improvement framework that you described? How long does it usually take?
Well, to be honest, it's a forever process, right? Establishing that framework is about saying, here's an approach we're going to use, right? And you take one part of it and you start working on it. My advice is for schools to bring a team together and to spend, say, 6 weeks, maybe the next unit of study, to say, what's this thing we're going to change? How are we all going to do something different in our classrooms? In a high school, because of the subject areas, it might be all of the teachers who are teaching first year students, and they might agree on using a common study strategy that they're going to teach students, using some common behavioral expectations, coordinating homework, those kinds of things you can set up and get happening in your school within 3 months. And then as that's successful, you repeat the cycle and you get better at it and you take on bigger things.
Thank you, Ms. Gallagher. And one more question. We have 1 minute left, I think. So what is the most crucial thing for providing this sustainability in the school development?
Sustainability, was that the question? The most important thing for sustainability is, in fact, building your culture in your school, where increasingly all of the adults in the school are really curious about what we can do next to improve. You have to build that teamwork. You have to be encouraging each other to do that. Because if it's just the principal who's pushing this, then the moment the principal leaves, nothing is sustainable in the way of change. If it's just built around 1 or 2 people, it's not sustainable. But if you bring everyone on board and you get them working on it and they experience some success early on, then even as the leader changes, they will keep using that process to drive forward with things that are good for kids.
Thank you, Ms. Gallagher. Thank you for your presentation. Thank you to all participants who attended and so gave the feedback so actively. So be sure to visit our next session, which is going to be the fourth plenary session. And I'm very glad that Mrs. Gallagher is going to share her expertise there as well. So thank you all. Goodbye.
Thank you and goodbye.